His words hit me like a punch straight to the chest. "You're worthless." My son's voice filled the living room so loudly that everything else stopped the talking. The laughter, even the clinking of dishes. When his fist slammed the table, the plate shook, and it felt like the whole room shrank until it was just him and me, standing on opposite sides of something I never thought we'd face. For a moment, no one moved. My relatives, his friends, even the neighbors who had joined us for dinner, everyone froze. Some pretended they hadn't heard him, staring at their food. Others looked at me, wide-eyed, waiting for me to answer back. But I couldn't. His words echoed in my head like a drumbeat. Worthless, worthless. After everything I had given him, after all the sacrifices, was that truly what I was to him? He stood tall, his face hard, his eyes burning with anger. "You've never done anything with your life," he said. "You've never given me anything. All you do is drag me down." Each word dug deeper than the last, like knives I couldn't pull out. I wanted to remind him of the nights I carried him when he was burning with fever, of the mornings I walked him to school with worn-out shoes so he could wear new ones. I wanted to tell him about the promise I made to his father on his deathbed that I would protect our boy with everything I had. But I couldn't get the words out. My voice was trapped, my chest heavy, my hands shaking, not from anger, but from heartbreak. The silence around us was suffocating. Someone cleared their throat, someone else shifted in their chair, but nobody said a word. Nobody defended me. And my son, my own son, looked at me like I was nothing more than a barrier in his way. I lowered my eyes to the floor, swallowing the lump in my throat, and wondered, how did we get here? How did the boy who once clung to my hand now have the heart to call me worthless? That night, I went to bed carrying the weight of his words heavier than any burden I had ever known. But what he didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that the story wasn't finished. He thought I had given him nothing, but the truth was waiting to come out. And it would arrive from the last place he expected. A phone call from the bank that would change everything. Long before that night, before my son cut me down with a single word, I had built my life around him. I wasn't a woman of wealth. My job paid little, and every paycheck was stretched thin. But what I couldn't give in money, I gave in love and sacrifice. When his father died too young, I held his hand in that hospital room and heard his final words. "Take care of him. Make sure he knows he's loved." I swore I would, and I kept that promise every single day. I worked double shifts when I could, picked up odd jobs when the factory hours weren't enough. I lived on less so he could have more. My shoes grew old and full of holes, but his were always new. When food ran short, I went without so his plate stayed full, and I never once complained. Each sacrifice was worth it the moment I saw him smile. I still remember teaching him to ride his bike. His little hands gripped the handlebars so tight, his knuckles turned white. I ran beside him, holding him steady, until finally, he found his balance. The wind caught his hair, his laughter rang out, and when he turned back, his eyes sparkled with pride. "I did it, Mom," he shouted. Moments like that, those were my treasures. At night, I would sit quietly by his bed, watching him sleep, listening to his soft breathing. The world outside was hard, but in that small room, I felt peace. I promised myself he would never carry the same struggles I had. When money got tight, I fixed what was broken instead of buying new. I took old furniture from curbs and sanded it down until it looked fresh again. I even sold things I loved just to pay the bills. And little by little, I put money aside. A few dollars here, a few there. It wasn't much, but it was something. I saved it all for him, for his future, for college, for a business, or simply for a day when life knocked him down. I wanted him to have a safety net. I wanted him to never know the fear of going without. He was my whole world, my reason for getting up early, for working late, for pushing through when I was exhausted. To everyone else, I was just an ordinary woman with a modest job, nothing special to my name. But in my son's eyes, I thought I was more his protector, his provider, his safe place. At least, that's what I believed. But time has a way of changing children. The little boy who once ran into my arms at the school gate, who sat proudly on my shoulders during parades, who used to whisper, "Don't ever leave me, Mom," began to pull away. At first, it was small. He wanted to walk to school by himself. He stopped holding my hand. He rolled his eyes at my jokes, brushing me off with, "Yeah, Mom, I know." I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up, they become independent. That's what's supposed to happen. But as the years passed, the gap between us grew wider. The laughter we once shared became rare. Still, I held on to the memories, believing that no matter what, the bond we built, and the sacrifices I made would never disappear. What I didn't know then was that the boy who once called me his hero would one day look at me with cold eyes and call me worthless. When he became a teenager, the warmth between us faded faster. The boy who once clung to me now looked at me with impatience, sometimes even embarrassment. It started with little things. He no longer wanted me to walk him to school. If I did, he slowed down, pretending he wasn't with me. The same mother who once carried him proudly had somehow become someone he didn't want his friends to notice. I laughed it off at first. He's just growing up, I told myself, but inside, it hurt. And that quiet ache only grew. Then came the questions and comparisons. One night at dinner, he shoved his plate away and demanded, "Why don't we have what other families do? Why don't we ever go on vacations like my friends? Why don't you buy a new car or nicer clothes?" I sat there, stunned. I tried to explain about bills, saving, and how I stretched every dollar to make sure we had what we needed. But he didn't care about explanations. He wanted more. "You've never achieved anything," he spat one night, after I refused to increase his allowance. "You're just stuck." His words cut deep, but I stayed silent. How could he understand? He had never seen the nights I skipped meals, the mornings I worked with aching bones, the times I went without so he never had to. To him, the life I had built looked ordinary, not the miracle it truly was. As he grew older, his resentment grew too. He surrounded himself with people who made him feel ashamed of our life. Friends who bragged about their parents' cars, their vacations, their expensive clothes. They fed his pride and planted shame in his heart, convincing him that living modestly meant being nobody. One evening, I overheard him on the phone. His voice was muffled but sharp. "My mom's a nobody. She's done nothing with her life. I can't wait to get out of this house." The words felt like a knife. I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding. I wanted to rush in, to remind him of everything I had done, every sacrifice I had made. But instead, I walked quietly to my bedroom, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the worn floorboards. How did we get here? I remembered when he used to brag about me, telling his classmates I was the smartest, the funniest, the strongest. Back then, I was his hero. But somewhere along the way, I had become his shame. I told myself he was young, that life has a way of humbling even the proudest hearts. But with time, his words only grew sharper. At meals, he ignored me, laughing at his phone while I sat across the table, invisible. When I asked about his future, he brushed me off. When I gave advice, he rolled his eyes. When I reminded him of the values his father and I believed in, he muttered, "Old-fashioned nonsense." It felt like every sacrifice I had ever made had been erased and rewritten as failure in his eyes. And yet, I stayed quiet. I kept working, kept saving, kept protecting the little nest egg I had built after his father died, the account I opened in our son's name, little by little, dollar by dollar. He didn't know about it. He didn't know that while he called me a nobody, the future he dreamed of was being built in silence through every sacrifice I made. Then, one night after another fight, he stormed out, leaving behind words that echoed long after he was gone. "You'll never be anything, Mom. Never." And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just teenage rebellion anymore. It wasn't just growing pains. It was something deeper, darker. He didn't just fail to see my worth, he truly believed I had none. He had begun to believe I truly had no worth. And one night, that belief exploded in a way that left me broken in front of everyone. It was supposed to be a normal evening, a family dinner, with relatives and a few of my son's friends. I spent the whole day cooking, setting the table just right, hoping we could have a warm night together, the kind we hadn't shared in years. For a while, it seemed to work. The table was full, conversations buzzed, laughter filled the room. I let myself smile, remembering when my son's laughter used to be the sound I loved most in the world. Then a cousin, meaning no harm, asked him a simple question. "So, what's next for you? College, work, maybe starting something of your own?" The room went quiet, everyone waiting for his answer. My son leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Well, I'd have more options if my mom had actually done something with her life. But you can't build much of a future when all you've got is her." A ripple of awkward chuckles passed around the table, but his words hit me square in the heart. My smile dropped. I tried to stay calm. "I may not have much," I said softly, "but everything I've done for you." He scoffed, shaking his head. "Don't start with that again. You've done nothing. You've given me nothing. His voice rose, hard and sharp. "You're worthless." The word struck like a slap across the face. The table went dead silent. Forks froze in midair. A glass clinked too loudly as someone set it down. All eyes darted between us, some full of pity, others pretending to be busy with their food. No one spoke, no one defended me. I sat frozen, staring at the boy I had raised, the boy I had carried on my hip, the boy I had sacrificed everything for. And now, when he looked at me, all he saw was shame, worthless. That was who I was to him, not his mother, not the woman who worked until her bones ached, who skipped meals so he wouldn't have to, who stood at bus stops in the freezing cold after long shifts. To him, I was nothing but a burden. Memories flooded me, his fevers, his first day of school, the nights I stayed awake sewing buttons or patching shoes. I wanted to shout the truth, to remind him that worth isn't measured in vacations, or new cars, or expensive clothes, that worth is in love, in sacrifice, in showing up every single day. But the words stuck in my throat. He glared at me, daring me to fight back. His friend Daniel smirked beside him, enjoying the scene like it was entertainment. My hands trembled under the table. Instead of answering, I lowered my eyes to my plate. The silence stretched until someone finally changed the subject. Laughter returned, thin and forced, but the damage had been done. The word hung heavy over me. I sat invisible at my own table, the sting of humiliation pressing down on me. My son laughed again, at something Daniel said, as though nothing had happened, as though he hadn't just ripped me apart in front of everyone. Later, when the house was empty and quiet, I sat in the dark on the edge of my bed. His word replayed again and again, worthless, worthless, heavier with each echo. I buried my face in my hands. He believed I had nothing. He believed I had given nothing. He believed I was nothing. But deep down, a small spark of truth still flickered. He didn't know about the account. He didn't know that while he mocked me as a nobody, the future he dreamed of was already waiting, built dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice. The house felt suffocating after that night. Every sound, the creak of the floor, the slam of a door pressed down on me. I couldn't sleep, even in the silence. His voice followed me, louder than the ticking of the clock. By morning, I found him sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling his phone, laughing at something his friend had sent. He barely looked up when I walked in. "Good morning," I said quietly. He muttered something under his breath, grabbed his bag, and left. No eye contact, no apology, no warmth. Just gone. It felt like I was living with the shadow of my son. He was there in the house, but the love and gratitude were gone, replaced by something colder. And somehow, that was worse than if he had been absent. He was right in front of me, but he had chosen to erase me. That day, I tried to keep myself busy, anything to quiet the storm in my head. I fixed a broken chair, sorted through old boxes, walked slowly through the garden, but everywhere I turned, I saw reminders of the life I had built around him. The sweater I once mended for him as a child, the school project I stayed up all night helping him with, the photo of us on his graduation day, his arm around me, his smile shining. I stared at that picture for a long time, whispering to myself, what changed? By evening, the house was quiet. He came home late, and I overheard him on the phone in the hallway. His voice was loud, confident, careless. "I can't wait to get out of here. She's got nothing. I've been carrying her for years. Carrying me." The words twisted like a knife in my chest. He truly believed I had nothing, that somehow I was a burden on him. He had rewritten our entire story. In his mind, he was the provider, and I was the leech. I pressed myself against the wall, my stomach heavy with dread, and listened as his voice dropped lower. "Once I'm gone, I don't owe her anything. She's already useless." The cruelty stung deeper than any wound I had ever felt. But worse than the insult was the certainty in his tone. He believed it with his whole heart. Shaking, I returned to my room and sat on the edge of my bed. My hands trembled as I pulled open the nightstand drawer and took out the old envelope I had hidden for years. Inside were the papers, the account statements, the records, the deposits that had quietly grown into something real. It wasn't just money. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't worthless. Proof that while he mocked me, I had been building a future for him all along. I ran my fingers over the faded pages, remembering everything they represented: the long nights, the skipped meals, the exhaustion etched into my bones. Every deposit was a piece of me, saved in silence. But even as I held the envelope, doubt crept in. Would it even matter if I showed him? Would he understand? Or would he twist it into another weapon? Would he say it proved nothing, that love couldn't be measured in numbers? For the first time in years, I questioned not only his love for me, but my worth as a mother. Had I failed him? Had all my sacrifices only raised resentment? I leaned back and closed my eyes. My husband's face flashed before me, his last words echoing. Take care of him. Promise me. I had kept that promise every single day, even when it broke me, even when my son spat on everything I had done. I opened my eyes and stared at the envelope. My son thought I was worthless. He thought I had nothing. He was wrong, and one way or another, he was going to find out. The days that followed felt like watching everything unravel. His words grew sharper, his tone colder. He no longer bothered to hide his contempt. One evening, I asked gently if he could be home for dinner. It's been a while since we sat together, I said, trying to hide the ache in my voice. He didn't even glance up from his phone. What? So you can lecture me about how hard you've worked? I'm not interested, Mom. Just stop trying. You're pathetic, worthless, useless. His vocabulary for me had shrunk into insults, each one heavier than the last. I swallowed the pain and stayed quiet. Anger would only build a bigger wall between us. But when he slammed the door on his way out, I sank into the chair at the table, feeling smaller than I had ever felt. What was left of me? A tired woman, worn from years of labor, with no achievements to brag about. No wealth to flaunt, as a mother holding on to a son who despised her. Yet even in my doubt, I couldn't let go of the envelope in my drawer. Late at night, I would pull it out, trace the numbers with shaking fingers. It wasn't a fortune, but it was solid, steady, a testament to decades of sacrifice. It was my legacy. It was proof. Still, I didn't reveal it. Not yet. I wanted the moment to matter. I wanted him to see me, not just the numbers. But each day, he slipped further away. One night, as I sat in the living room, I heard his voice booming from his room again, loud and brash. Yeah, she's nothing. She's living off me now. Once I'm out of here, I won't ever look back. I don't owe her a thing. I closed my eyes, my chest aching. Living off him. Had he really twisted our story that much? I thought of the bills I paid, the roof I kept over our heads, the food I cooked every single day, all of it from my hands. And yet, in his mind, he was the one carrying me. That night, lying awake in the dark, I whispered into the silence. I didn't know if I was speaking to myself, to his late father, or to God. I've kept my promise, but I don't know how much longer I can carry this alone. The answer came the next morning. The phone rang, its sharp sound breaking through the quiet house. My son grabbed it before I could, his voice full of the usual impatience. Hello? He said. There was a pause. Then his tone changed. Wait, what account? I froze in the hallway, my heart pounding. Another pause. That balance. That's impossible. Are you sure? I watched as the color drained from his face. Slowly, he lowered the phone, staring straight ahead like the floor had just shifted beneath him. What is it? I asked, my voice calm, even though my chest was thundering. He looked at me with wide eyes, confused, shaken, the arrogance gone for once. The bank, he whispered hoarsely. They called about an account in your name, but it's huge. I don't understand. I thought you had nothing. I stepped closer, my gaze steady. That's because you never looked past what you wanted to see. The silence between us was heavy, charged. For the first time in years, he had no insult ready, no quick dismissal, just shock. Mom, his voice cracked. How is this possible? I didn't let him finish. For years I had kept quiet, carrying his rejection like a stone in my chest. But now, the time for silence was over. It's real, I said softly but firmly. That account exists, and it's been there for decades. He blinked rapidly, shaking his head like he could force the truth away. No, it can't be. You've always struggled. You're right, I said, cutting in gently. I always struggled, but never for myself. Every long shift, every sacrifice, every meal I skipped it, wasn't because I was careless. It was because I was saving quietly, patiently, for you. He froze, his mouth open, but no words came. I walked past him, opened my nightstand drawer, and pulled out the envelope I had guarded for years. My hands didn't shake this time. I placed it on the table between us and spread the papers out one by one. Statements, deposits, records of a lifetime of sacrifice. His hands trembled as he reached for one, scanning the numbers. His breathing quickened. This is real. This is so much. Why didn't you tell me? Because you weren't ready, I said, holding his gaze. Because you spent years thinking worth was measured by cars, vacations, showing off to friends. You called me worthless because you couldn't see past what you didn't have. I didn't want you to look at this account and see only numbers. I wanted you to see the love behind it, the nights I worked until my body ached, the meals I skipped so yours was full, the dreams I buried so yours could live. His face crumpled slightly, pride the only thing holding him up. I went on, my voice steady. You called me pathetic, useless, worthless, and yet all this time, I was building a future for you. Not because I wanted your thanks, not because I needed your approval, but because I made a promise to your father and to myself that you would never walk through life without a foundation. Even when you hated me, I kept that promise. The house was silent. My son's eyes darted back and forth between the papers and my face, as though he was seeing me for the first time. Finally, his voice broke, soft and childlike. Why didn't you say anything when I said those things? Because words don't change hearts, I told him gently. Only truth does. And today, you finally heard it, not from me, but from the bank. From the account that proves I'm not what you said I was. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him. He pressed a shaky hand to his forehead, his eyes wet with disbelief. For the first time in years, he didn't look like the proud young man who had thrown cruel words at me. He looked small, again, like the boy who used to cling to me when storms rattled the windows. You're not worthless, he whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. I was wrong. I didn't rush to answer. I let the silence sit, heavy between us. He needed to feel it, to understand what his words had done. At last, I spoke, calm but steady. You're right about one thing, I said. I'm not worthless. I never was. The only tragedy is how long it took for you to see it. For a moment, he just stood there, looking between the papers and my face. His mouth opened like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. The smirk, the sharp tone, the arrogance, they were all gone. What stood before me was not a man in control, but a trembling young man who suddenly looked lost. Mom, his voice cracked. I didn't know. I thought you had nothing. I took a deep breath. I had dreamed of hearing remorse for years. But now that it was here, it felt fragile, like it could vanish if I pushed too hard. No, I said softly. You didn't want to know. You were too busy comparing me to everyone else. Too busy listening to people who told you I wasn't enough, and you believed them. You looked me in the face and called me worthless. His jaw tightened, tears filled his eyes, but he tried to hold them back. Pride was still fighting for space. I didn't mean it, he stammered. I was angry. My voice rose without meaning to. Angry at what? That I couldn't hand you the world wrapped in gold, that your life was built on sacrifice instead of luxury. Angry that I gave you everything I had, and still it wasn't enough for you. The words spilled out of me, years of silence breaking loose. Do you know what it felt like to hear my own son say I was nothing? To hear the child I raised alone tell me I gave him nothing when I gave him my entire life. His face crumpled, his shoulders slumped, heavy with shame. He dropped into a chair, buried his face in his hands, and finally the tears broke free. His body shook as he sobbed. I'm sorry, he whispered through the tears. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize. I stood watching him. Part of me wanted to cross the room and pull him into my arms like I used to when he was scared of thunderstorms. But another part, the part that had carried years of insults and contempt, kept me rooted in place. You didn't see, I said quietly. But I was always here. Every long shift, every sleepless night, every meal I went without so you wouldn't have to. And when you called me worthless, I stayed silent. Because I hoped one day you'd understand, and today, you finally do. He lifted his head, his face red and streaked with tears. Can you forgive me? He asked, his voice raw, broken. My throat tightened. Forgiveness, such a small word, yet it carried so much weight. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I saw his father's face again, his tired smile, his steady hand in mine, his last words, take care of him. Promise me. When I opened my eyes, I looked at my son not as the man who had hurt me, but as the boy his father and I once loved together. I already have, I whispered. I forgave you the moment you said those words, not because you were right, but because you're my son, and because love doesn't disappear, even when respect does. He broke then, completely. His sobs came hard and loud, shaking his whole body, as if years of bitterness were finally pouring out of him. He stumbled up and crossed the room, falling into my arms. For the first time in years, I held my son again. Not the cruel, distant version of him, but the child I had raised, shaking, vulnerable, stripped of pride. I don't deserve you, he choked out against my shoulder. Maybe not, I said softly, stroking his back, but you'll always have me. That's what mothers do. In that embrace, something shifted. The wounds were still raw. The scars would take time to fade, but the walls had fallen. The truth had broken through. For the first time in years, there was hope. The house felt different after that night. The tension that once filled every silence wasn't gone, but it had softened. Something had cracked open, leaving space for something new to grow. The next morning, I found him at the kitchen table, staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. His eyes were swollen, his hair messy, and for the first time, his usual swagger was nowhere to be seen. When I walked into the kitchen, he looked up quickly, almost like he was bracing himself for me to start talking first. But I didn't. I just moved around quietly, making myself a cup of coffee and letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, he cleared his throat. His voice was rough, shaky. "I don't know how to face you right now," he said. I sat down across from him, looking at him calmly. "One day at a time," I told him. "That's all we can do." He nodded, eyes dropping to the table. It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was something. In the days that followed, little changes started to show. He didn't rush out of the house like before. When I cooked, he actually ate without rolling his eyes or complaining. Sometimes, he even helped clear the table. He didn't talk much, but he stayed in the room with me, and his silence no longer felt heavy with anger. Those small things, they were enough for me. For now, I spent more time outside in the garden. It had grown wild while things were bad between us. But working in the dirt, pulling weeds, touching the earth, gave me peace. One afternoon, as I crouched near the tomato plants, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw him standing there, watching quietly. "You always liked this garden," he said softly, like he was afraid to disturb me. I smiled faintly. "It keeps me grounded," I answered. He nodded, hesitated, then turned back toward the house. It wasn't much, but that small moment, him noticing something I loved, meant more than I could explain. At night, lying in bed, I thought a lot about forgiveness. I knew it doesn't just bloom overnight. Wounds like ours take time to heal. But I also thought about strength, the strength it took to stay silent for years, and the strength it took to finally speak my truth. For so long, I had let his cruel words make me doubt my worth, but now I saw it clearly. My worth had never been his to decide. It was always there, in every sacrifice I made, in every ounce of love I gave. And maybe, just maybe, he was starting to see it too. A week later, it finally happened. I was in the living room, the late afternoon sun spilling through the curtains, painting everything gold. The quiet no longer felt suffocating, it was fragile, but almost comfortable. My son walked in slowly, his steps uncertain, no phone in his hand, no arrogance on his face. He stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering courage. "Mom," he said softly, his voice trembling. "Can we talk?" I set down the book I wasn't really reading. "Of course." He sat across from me, fidgeting with his hands. For a while, he said nothing, and I waited. Finally, he took a shaky breath. "I keep hearing the words I said to you. Worthless, pathetic. I don't know how you let me say those things and still stayed." His eyes filled with tears. I swallowed hard but kept my voice steady. "Because I promised your father and myself that I'd take care of you, even if it meant carrying pain you couldn't see." Tears spilled down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. "I was wrong, Mom. So wrong. You weren't worthless. You weren't pathetic. You gave me everything, and I was too blind, too proud to see it. I'm sorry, truly sorry." For years I had wondered if I'd ever hear those words. Now that I did, they felt heavier than I imagined, like a weight lifting and pressing down all at once. I leaned in closer, speaking softly but firmly. "You can't change the past, son, but you can choose how you live from here. Respect, gratitude, love, those are choices, and they matter more than money ever could." He nodded, tears running freely. "I want to try. I want to do better. I want to be the son you deserve." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his trembling ones. "Then start with today," I said gently. "One step at a time. We'll build from here." In that moment, something shifted. Not a full repair, not yet. Wounds like ours take time, but it was a beginning. For the first time in years, his eyes met mine without pride, without contempt, without anger. His eyes weren't the eyes of a stranger anymore. They were the eyes of the boy I once knew. The boy who had once trusted me with his whole heart. Later that evening, we sat side by side in the garden, pulling weeds together. He glanced at me, his voice soft, almost breaking. "Thank you, Mom." 3 simple words, but for me, they were worth more than all the money in the world. The hardest words don't always come from enemies. Sometimes they come from the people closest to us, and those cut the deepest. Being called worthless by your own child, that kind of pain sinks into your bones. And yet, this story shows something important. Love and sacrifice don't always get noticed right away. Sometimes they stay hidden until the truth finally breaks through. This mother carried that silence for years. She gave up meals, sleep, and comfort to give her son a future, even when he couldn't see it. She endured rejection and loneliness, all while quietly keeping her promise. In the end, it wasn't money or status that opened his eyes. It was realizing what that wealth really meant. It meant devotion. It meant love. It meant promises kept. Maybe you've felt that too, giving everything for someone who didn't see your worth. Maybe you've wondered if your sacrifices would ever be recognized. If so, remember this: love always leaves a mark, even if it takes years for others to finally see it. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever felt underestimated, only for the truth to come out later? Share your story in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and tap the bell because the next story might be yours. That's today's story. If it touched you, leave a like and subscribe. And don't forget, share your own life lesson in the comments below.